Today, we're going to be diving into the showcase schedule. So, in particular, for soccer players going out there, like this is a big time where there's a lot of games going on in a very short time period. So, this is definitely going to apply for kind of like even baseball players with back-to-back games, or really anybody that's in a tournament setting and environment. But we're going to dive into the unique fueling concepts and strategies that need to be in place to be able to make sure that you're performing your best, not only for the very first game, but for all the subsequent games that follow thereafter. And there's a lot of things to be mindful of with that. And so, why these types of weekends and why this showcase weekend is different? Because one game, when we're focusing on that, it's really a fueling problem. We need to make sure we break it down so that we are optimally fueled for that game. When we get a showcase weekend and we've got back-to-back games, that really shifts a bit to becoming a recovery problem because we need to focus and prioritize on how we're recovering in between games to maintain that level of performance. Because the reality is, in a tournament setting, most games in that environment, you've got 24 to 48 hours between games to be able to get yourself ready and go back out there and perform. The body's timeline to be able to be fully recovered is about 72 to 120 hours. That's about 3 to 5 days. It's typically going to take about 3 days for us to optimize and maximize our fuel and to get that back, to restore those glycogen stores and get that energy tank back up to maximum. It can take up to about 5 days for our muscles to fully just physically recover. So all the pounding, the exertion, that soreness, it can sometimes take a full 5 days for that to really return back to baseline. So the reaction in that series of events that can follow with this is if we're not careful after game one to really focus and prioritize that recovery piece, that's going to all compound. However much we don't recover by game two is then extra that we need to try and make up for between game two and game three. And if we're not making that up between game two and game three, we continue to fall further and further behind. Meaning, by the end of that tournament, we are absolutely gassed, depending on how many games are there. So, what we want to make sure that we're prioritizing is that recovery in between games. And that's where a lot of players do lose a lot of ground. And that's where you can really make up that ground. That can be the difference maker to really help separate yourself to being able to make sure that you perform great in game one, but now you're going to be able to go out in game two and show that again. That's the gap that we really want to make sure that we're optimizing because a lot of players aren't. And so, what does a game actually do to your body? This is what we want to make sure that we're aware of so we know what are we trying to address. One of the biggest things is just truly how much fuel and how much energy your body is expending in the game itself. A full match is going to empty out your fuel tanks and deplete that fuel storage by about half. So that glycogen stores, those carbohydrate stores within the body, after a full 90-minute game, you're going to be about half of what you started the game with. And for those fast twitch muscle fibers, those muscles that are really utilized for those explosive movements of the sprints, the jumps, all of those types of things, those are going to be hit even harder. Those are going to be the most impacted muscle fibers out there. And so we really want to make sure that we're refueling those muscle fibers to be able to maintain those sprint performances. And then the other big thing is that muscle damage that we were talking about before. This takes the longest to fully recover. That muscle damage is a very slow recovery. And that muscle damage really happens from any of those cutting, decelerating, and kind of those abrupt stops where we're trying to change our body's position. Any physical play is also naturally going to add up to that as well. While it may not be to the extent of like American football or hockey where you're getting pounded, it is still a very physical sport, and your body's going to be paying the price for that. It's going to take a toll that we want to be mindful of. And so, with everything that's going on right there, there's no one supplement that's going to be able to fix all of this. It's those foundational pieces of making sure that we're rehydrating, fueling, and sleeping. That's really going to be the biggest differentiator to help make sure that we're addressing all of those different things. So, regardless of any marketing strategy, don't fall into the trap of thinking a supplement's going to be able to fix all of that. It's the food, it's the timing, it's the sleep to be able to make sure that you're recovering as optimally as possible with as confined of a time constraint as what you have. And so the biggest thing before any tournament, you need to begin preparing. That tournament really starts the day before. And you need to make sure that you're preparing, because once a tournament begins, you want to make sure that you're locked in. You want to have already controlled everything that you can control beforehand. That means preparing early. A lot of players do think that the tournament prep begins the day of game day, but it really starts the day before. And one of the big things is fueling appropriately the day before. And in particular, making sure that you're getting adequate carbohydrates in the day before. Especially if you've got an early morning game, you need to really prioritize the day before to ensure that when you wake up, you've got less time now to really eat and consume anything before you're out on the field. The day before becomes even more important. And so we want to make sure that we're consuming adequate carbs to keep that energy tank as topped off as possible, because that is the energy source your body's primarily going to be utilizing during the match itself. And so your carb intake during that day, even if we've tapered back the training a little bit to allow the body that time to be able to rest, recover, and prioritizing tomorrow's match, that carb intake still needs to be higher. In particular, it needs to be relatively higher than what a typical training session even is, because we are trying to really add fuel to that tank to make sure that we're good to go. Now, when having those meals, and in particular, as we get closer and closer to the evening and closer to kickoff, we want to be mindful of our fat and fiber intake by decreasing that a little bit. And the reason for that is because fat and fiber, it takes longer for the body to process all of that and get it out of the stomach. So if we consume an abundance of fat and fiber, it's going to sit heavy in the stomach. And if we consume too much of that too close to the game, it's just going to increase the chances that we've got a little bit of a cinder block feeling of that just sitting in our stomach when we head out onto the field, which we do not want. And then the day before as well, we really want to make sure that we're prioritizing our hydration. Because when we wake up on game day, that's not the time to try to make up any ground that we could have done the day before. If we wake up the day of a game and we're already dehydrated, it's a recipe for disaster, because we typically aren't going to have enough time to get that rehydration back to as optimal as we would like it to be. So we need to make sure the day before that we're staying hydrated, we keep the water bottle on hand, so that way when we wake up, we're just making sure that we're topping things off to keep everything going. We're not trying to play catch up. Make sure you're not staying up super late. Make sure that you give yourself that ample opportunity to be able to rest, recover, and wake up refreshed, ready to take on the day. And then once game day is officially here, you get into the game, you perform, you do your thing. The most important 90 minutes of that weekend is going to be the 90 minutes after that final whistle. And the reason I say that is because between games, because we have such a short amount of time, we need to make sure that we get that first meal and start to get that first nutrition in as quickly as possible. Because if we delay that, that means we're just squishing even more how little time that we have to get everything in that we need to get in. So the sooner that we start, the sooner that we're able to start refueling, the sooner we're able to start replenishing and repairing everything in the body to be able to give us as much of an opportunity as possible to feel 100% for that next game. So immediately after that final whistle, we want to make sure that we have something on hand to be able to start that repair process. And in particular, your body, as soon as you are done with a match, is going to be like a sponge. It is going to take up and absorb and utilize anything and everything that we provide it. It wants that. It is craving that to be ready to go. And in particular, more and more research and studies are showing that the earlier that you get that fuel in, the quicker the body's going to be able to start to repair and replenish, both repairing the muscle and, most importantly, replenishing those glycogen stores, that fuel tank. If we delay that intake, even just a couple hours thereafter, those glycogen stores don't seem to be able to be as receptive and as reactive to be able to increase that level again. So we want to make sure, take advantage of that opportunity, get some of those carbohydrates in to replenish that glycogen store in particularly as quick as possible, knowing we got to go again quickly. So the carbs are going to be very important. We also want to make sure that we do have some protein in there, because that's going to start that muscle repair piece. And it's the muscle soreness and that muscle repair that does take the longest to be able to fully repair. And so knowing that, we want to make sure that we're doing everything we can to make the most of the time that we have. So get the protein in. And then the other thing is fluid. Ensure that we are rehydrating. It's going to start to get really hot out there. So we want to make sure that as much as we just sweated out there, we're starting to replace that. Because just like we were mentioning the night before the game, we want to ensure we're hydrated to wake up and not have to play catch up. Same thing here. After the game, we really want to try to replenish and get all that fluid back in. So consuming adequate fluid in general is going to be huge, but making sure that we have some added electrolytes is going to be important as well. In particular, sodium. That salt and that sodium is really going to help the body to be able to absorb and retain the fluid that we're consuming. A big thing to be mindful of too is that typically after a game, a lot of times our appetite is pretty suppressed. And so if you happen to fall into that category, prioritize some liquid calories because liquids aren't going to be as filling and it's still going to be a way in which you can still get the carbs in, get that protein in, and get that fluid in. All three in one thing. So a smoothie can be a great option, but we just want to make sure, again, if you know that typically your appetite isn't overly high after a game, the day before, we're preparing for that. We pack something along those lines to be able to ensure that we're able to start that refueling process as promptly as possible. And so that's where, again, that post game meal, the biggest thing is we want to make sure that we are hitting on every single one of those. We want to have those carbohydrates in there, whether that be some fruit, rice, bread, pasta, sports drinks, whatever sounds most appealing and is going to sit well for you, get it in. We need to start that glycogen replenishment, get those fuel tanks topped off again to be able to be ready to go for game number 2. Then from a protein perspective, ensure that we've got a protein component included in there. Chocolate milk is a classic. It's got some carbs already in there. It's going to be very quick digesting carbohydrates, and it's a good quality protein source. But if you're not a chocolate milk fan, which I've absolutely fallen into that category, not a fan, teach their own. Greek yogurt, some chicken, a sandwich, a protein shake, getting anywhere from 20 to 40 grams of protein is really going to be able to help start that repair process. And then make sure we've got the fluid and sodium piece in there as well to really start the rehydration. Now that overnight piece, this is what we really want to make sure that we're prioritizing because depending upon when our game is, we could be having a night game, meaning we've got bed kind of right around the corner thereafter. And so what we want to focus on and start to prioritize between Saturday night and Sunday's match is really making sure that we keep carbohydrates elevated. Those carbs are going to be key to consume throughout to really help push that glycogen replenishment. We want to make sure that we're getting that back up. Then we want to ensure that we continue to distribute that protein intake as optimally as we can. If we had a morning or afternoon game on Saturday, preparing for Sunday, we want to make sure that we still have our snacks, we still have our regular meals to get that protein in. So that way by the end of the day, we can feel more confident. We hit that total protein intake, which is going to be priority number 1. But then if we're distributing it, we can get that extra little bonus of just helping ensure that the body's optimized to be able to utilize that protein better. Then as we approach bed, make sure that we've got a pre-sleep, a pre-bedtime snack. Get some protein in and get some carbs in. Those are both going to be huge. The carbs, again, to be able to help replenish those energy tanks, and that protein to help make sure that when we sleep and when the body is doing the most recovery that it does, which is what happens when we sleep, it's got all the tools at its disposal that it needs to maximize that muscle repair and muscle building. So get that protein, get that carbohydrate combination fuel before you go to bed. But at the end of the day, the big picture is really just making sure that you are consuming enough food. You do not want to go to bed underfueled, so get those foods in, get those beverages in. Whatever sounds most appealing and sits the best for you, we want to make sure we're leaning into that and prioritizing it because we want to ensure at the end of the day that we're just consuming enough in general. That's really priority number 1. Before we start worrying too much about the specifics and the granular components of things, we just need to make sure that we're eating enough. So make sure that we do the best that we can there because these types of things are really what's going to help separate those players between game 1 and game 2. The individuals who lock in on the recovery piece are going to feel better come game 2, and they're going to perform better come game 2. Now, if we talk about the game day breakfast itself, a lot of times this is going to be that last meal before the game kicks off. And so we want to be mindful. Depending on when that is, if we have the capability of getting a full meal in, that we do so. And that timeline that I would recommend to kind of be mindful of is generally 3 to 4 hours. If you have that amount of time, get a full meal in, get that full breakfast in. If we don't have 3 to 4 hours and we are on a little bit more of a time crunch, prioritize more pure carbohydrate type items. So if we've got that full 3 to 4 hours and we're able to get a complete meal in, make sure have some protein, have some carbs, get a little fruit in there. A little bit of fat isn't the end of the world, but that protein piece and the carbohydrates and the fluid are going to be the key focuses. Then make sure, again, carbohydrate forward. We want to continue to push that glycogen replenishment piece. Be mindful of the fat, be mindful of the fiber, because that is going to slow the digestion piece. We don't want that cinder block feeling in the stomach, and we want that food to get in and out relatively quickly. But the big thing too is feel okay with eating before a game. A lot of times the thought is, well, I want to be lighter when I'm out on the field. That is okay, but that doesn't mean you should not eat by any means. That food that you're consuming is what's going to allow you to push yourself harder come the 80th minute type of a thing. So don't fall into that trap. If you feel as though you typically feel heavy going into a game, evaluate what you have been eating. Has it been relatively high in fat and fiber, or has it been more of the basic carbohydrates? Odds are, if you're feeling heavy, it's one of the higher fats or fiber contents likely contributing to that. But do an evaluation, and if you happen to have a little bit of excitement and some nerves beforehand, focus on liquid calories. The liquids are going to be able to get in and out even quicker there. But the timing is going to make a difference as well. We want to make sure that if we are consuming a larger meal, a complete meal, that you give your body time to digest it. The closer to the game, the more simple, the more basic carbohydrate type items it is that we focus on. And then at the end of the day too, the biggest thing, no new foods on game days. You want to ensure that whatever it is that you're consuming, your body is familiar with it, that you are familiar with it, and you know, if I consume this, I'm going to feel good, no issues, and you can go out there and perform. This is not the time to try sushi for the first time in your life. Don't do that. Stick to what you're familiar with, stick to those staple items to be able to go out there and prepare. Then what we want to be mindful of is the vast majority of athletes are not consuming adequate carbohydrates. 8% have been found to be hitting the recommended amount of carbohydrates. And this is for elite soccer players playing at high levels. 8% were hitting that research supported recommendation for the amount of carbohydrates to consume. That is mind boggling. And so at the end of the day, it really just comes back to what we were discussing earlier. It's just make sure you continue to prioritize that carbohydrate piece. The glycogen stores is what your body is primarily going to be running on during the game itself. And we want to make sure that the body is properly fueled. And with this too, what I would say, and a big thing that kind of jumps out to me is with only 8% hitting that total carbohydrate recommendation, there's also a very good chance that they're just under fueling in general. Carbohydrates aside, that total intake, if we're this low in carbohydrates, there's a good chance we're going to be low in all the other categories as well. And so we really want to make sure that when we are about to be playing multiple games, that we are fueling appropriately for multiple games. We need to consume enough to be able to make sure the body's got the energy to do everything that we're asking it to do. And so this is a problem across the board. This is a challenge that everybody faces at all levels. And so if you're able to make sure that you are prioritizing your recovery, your fuel, you're going to be able to have the confidence and know going out there for game 2 that you've got more in the tank than that person across the field from you, that you're going to be able to feel a bit more refreshed, energized to make that late game push. So don't fall into that category. Make sure that you're able to prioritize your fueling. You keep that food on hand to be able to put your best foot forward. Now, when it comes to the hydration piece, Saturday's sweat becomes Sunday's problem. We want to make sure that for that first game, if we are sweating a lot and it's hot out there, that we replenish that. Soccer tends to be a sport where players lose a lot more fluid in general than other sports. You have less opportunity to replenish those fluids. So when you come off the field, you're going to be a little bit more dehydrated because there aren't timeouts. You aren't necessarily going to get substitutions in and out as frequently to be able to top that off. There may be some stoppage time to be able to grab a little bit of fluid and stuff like that, but in general, you're not going to be able to just rehydrate whenever you want. So we need to make sure at the end of the game, we really prioritize that fluid intake to replenish everything that was lost. Because it doesn't take a lot of dehydration or a lot of fluid loss to start to be impactful, both physically and cognitively. Because if we're dehydrated, a lot of times we think, oh, I'll get some cramps, I may increase my chances of like soft tissue injuries and things, which are true. But also, if we are dehydrated, we're not going to be as sharp cognitively. The brain needs proper hydration as well to be able to perform. So we want to make sure we're staying on top of that. And with that, if we aren't mindful and we aren't rehydrating, we're going to be waking up the next day in a dehydrated state and really trying to play catch up before kickoff. And that in and of itself is going to be a recipe for disaster as well, because the body isn't able to rehydrate like that. It takes time, it takes consistency. So we want to make sure as soon as the first game ends, we've got that water, we've got those electrolytes to start that rehydration process. Because if not, and we let that dehydration build, it's a snowball effect to where, again, between game one and the end of the tournament, your performance could be just night and day. And we want to try to preserve that as best as possible. So, overnight rehydration, we need to make sure, again, that we are consuming fluids throughout that final whistle till we go to bed, and making sure that when we wake up, we've still got that water bottle on hand to keep things going. The added electrolytes are what's going to be able to help the body to be able to absorb and retain that fluid that we're consuming as well. Now, some tips and strategies on how to eat well when the environment may be a little bit less than optimal, may leave a little bit to be desired. Because a lot of time these showcases, there may not be a whole lot of food options available. And so this typically ends up relying on hotels, fast food restaurants, gas stations, or the concession stands at the tournament itself. This is possible to be able to fuel ourselves, but we want to be mindful about what it is that we are choosing. So, from a hotel breakfast, these are some of the common items to typically focus on and that a lot of the continental breakfasts will still have: eggs, oatmeal, fruit, and toast. Those check essentially all of the boxes. Those are going to be fantastic. What you want to be mindful to kind of avoid is the pastry table. Don't just walk over there, start grabbing donuts and things like that and think, cool, I'm good. That's all I need. Don't do that. You still want to have that balanced plate. You still want to prioritize some protein, some carbs, get some fruit in there to maximize that recovery piece. Then, when going to fast food, always look to see if there's the ability to get grilled options. Try to avoid deep fried things as best as possible, whether it's deep fried chicken or deep fried potatoes for the French fries. Go for anything and everything that is not fried. That is going to be your best bet to ensure that you don't get that cinder block feeling in the stomach, because those fried foods are really going to sit heavy. That is what we want to avoid big time across the board. So choose the grilled options. Depending where you're at, if you're able to get just a baked potato instead of French fries, prioritize some rice, some pasta if they have it, depending on where you're going at. But at the end of the day, the biggest thing, avoid the fried foods. Then when it comes to gas stations, nowadays gas stations are actually starting to provide more and more quality products. But some of the staple items that you're going to be able to find kind of like on the shelves that you can just grab and go: beef jerky, sometimes in the refrigerators you're going to see string cheese, Greek yogurts, but then you're going to find bananas, peanut butter crackers, just in general regular crackers as well, to be able to help provide that carbohydrate piece, that protein component, to make sure, again, you're checking the boxes, but you're just piecing the puzzle together with some different items than you may typically do. But it's just that same thought process of what you want to be looking for. And then from the concession stand, you again want to be mindful to avoid any potential fried foods that they may be offering there. Some pretzels can be a great option. Sports drinks, if they tend to have it, can be great as well. Fruit cups, it is making a bit more of an appearance, not always, but if they're there, absolutely. Grab a fruit cup or a whole fruit type of a thing. But at the end of the day, something is going to be better than nothing. You want to make sure that you're getting those calories in. You want to make sure that you're fueling your body and just giving it energy in general. Recovery, performance, it all takes energy. and we want to make sure that we're providing it. So the goal with all this isn't being perfect. It's about making sure that we are consuming enough food at the appropriate times with whatever the options are that are in front of us. And so, what to pack with all of this? If we know that the environment isn't going to be optimal or conducive to having some of the preferred options, we want to pack what we need to be able to bridge that gap. This is where the night before that we are having everything prepared and ready to take with us, we want to make sure that we've got those familiar items, whether it be familiar breakfast foods from home or upon arrival to the tournament, we're able to make a grocery store run to be able to grab those things. Then once we have that checklist of grabbing everything, we want to make sure that one of those things we're prepared for is the post-game bag. We want to have that food readily available, so as soon as that final whistle goes, we're able to grab something to start that recovery process immediately while we wait for that meal that we have coming up around the corner. So whether that be a sandwich, like a general turkey sandwich, a protein shake, fruit, crackers, the electrolyte drink, any of these types of things, make sure that you include it. Check those boxes, have it on hand, keep it in a cooler so it doesn't, you don't want to leave just like a turkey sandwich out there in the hot sun. So keep it in a cooler, keep it food safe, but make sure that you have that. And then between games, make sure that you're having real meals built around the carbohydrates and adequate protein. So rice bowls are going to be fantastic. Chipotle, it's a fantastic option. Be mindful of the portions because sometimes it is a little heavy, but in general can be great. So rice bowls, sandwiches, pasta, nothing crazy, but those are the types of things that we want to make sure that we are consuming. Then the pre-game snack, something light, familiar, still carbohydrate based. Granola bars, fruit snacks, overall just like a peanut butter and jelly sandwich even can be fantastic. But pretzels, animal crackers is one of my go-tos. And this is also where if you prefer, you can also have things like Sour Patch Kids. It's going to be a pure carbohydrate source. This is the one time where those can be okay. But at the end of the day, the biggest thing is listening to your body and knowing what your body specifically responds best to. And then before bed, make sure we've got that protein source to be able to pair it with carbohydrates. So some examples would be Greek yogurt with granola or cereal on top, cottage cheese with fruit, or toast and peanut butter. But it's making sure that we have these items available so we're not dependent upon the gas station or the hotel. Because in the off chance that they don't have any of these things, we don't want to be caught in that type of a situation where then we're just scrambling to find something. So plan ahead, prepare, pack, and make sure that you're controlling what you can control to maximize that recovery. Because the one thing to really remember is that the highest priority is you need to recover. Your job after game one is to recover fast enough to perform at an equal or even better level in game two. This is all centered around making sure that you're able to optimize your performance and do just as well for games two as you were for games one. We want to make sure that we're doing everything that we can there, and all the strategies are going to be built around to be able to help for that very thing. Now, here are some common questions that tend to arise around kind of the showcase tournaments and things like that. First one being, is it okay to eat a lot after a game if I'm not hungry? Yes, this is one of those situations where you don't necessarily want to listen to the body and eat only when you're hungry. A lot of athletes experience a hunger drop after an intense game. But just because you're not hungry does not mean your body doesn't need that food. You need to begin that recovery process. If hunger is a challenge and you just don't feel hungry and you don't want to force yourself, go for something that is liquid based. Those liquid calories are going to be able to get digested and absorbed a lot quicker, a lot easier, and it's not going to provide that uncomfortable fullness feeling. But the biggest thing is we just want to make sure that we're getting something in, ideally within 30 minutes, and then having a real meal, a complete meal, within about an hour later. That's what we want to make sure, because that's going to ensure that we're getting some calories in, getting some quality nutrients in to really kickstart that recovery process. Then the next question, what if the food at the tournament is limited? This is where that packing comes into play. We don't want to be reliant on somebody else or some other store to be providing all of our food. This is where we can really control what we can control to make sure that you have everything that you need. Don't become dependent upon the tournament provide everything. prepare and have that on your own. Take that into your own hands, control that aspect of things to make sure that you've got it all there. Then, does sleep reset everything between games? Sleep is important. I will never deny that. But sleep is not going to reset everything. Sleep is still going to require optimal food and optimal fuel to maximize those effects. Because when we sleep, yeah, the body is primed to do its best recovery. But recovery takes energy. Recovery takes the building blocks to be able to repair everything that's trying to repair. So if we're recovering our muscles need protein. Those are the building blocks to actually have that repair occur. If we're sleeping and the body's sending the signal to do the repair, but we don't have the building blocks, but we don't have that protein to do it, the signal's getting sent, but it's not able to act upon it. So we want to make sure that we are eating appropriately to maximize the benefits of the sleep. And so getting that protein, getting those carbohydrates in are going to be key. Then, how do I know if I'm actually hydrated going into game two? This is where simply just looking at the color of your urine is going to be huge. It's super simple, super basic, but the color of your urine is going to really be able to paint that picture and provide that insight. If your urine is a white, pale, kind of straw lemonade type color, beautiful. That means you're in a fantastic spot, the body's hydrated, you're good to go. If it is a dark yellow, an apple juice type color, that's going to be kind of a red flag, meaning we need to start that rehydration process immediately and start hitting that hard to get that into that pale yellow. Now, what we don't need is for our urine to be completely clear. That means we might be a little bit overhydrated and likely need to increase the electrolytes because the body's not retaining all of the food that we're consuming. But at the end of the day, the best way to be able to judge and just quickly assess, am I hydrated or not, is just looking at the color of the urine.